I know exactly where we were the day war broke out. I was in Old Town, almost opposite Hallscroft, with my mother and father going to morning service. My father was in the fire service. The Guild Chapel bell went, which was one way of signalling people to go to the fire service, and he just turned and ran back along Chestnut Walk, through the gate in the paddock and up into the fire station, and was told, "We're at war, that's it, you're in the fire station for the fire service for the duration." I think the one thing that I remember vividly too is not being able to go to the dairy and buy an ice cream anymore. Because the dairy, which is now the Delicatessen, belonged to Griffin's, a lovely couple, and it was a dairy and they sold milk and everything, but they also sold ice cream. And of course, once the war came, that had to stop. And I certainly couldn't go and buy my sweets there anymore because it came down to coupons, buying things like that. I mean, there was the label factory down in Old Town which made the road signs and everything. And when the war came, of course, they made signs, but they didn't know what they were making signs for because they were all split up like a jigsaw. And then they went to other places where they were put together. Quite fantastic, really, when you stop to think about it.
At the top end of Loxley Road then, during the war at least, there was an anti-aircraft gun. And when the war ended, the thing was still there, you know, we used to go and play on that. And just behind this house in Manor Road, there was what would be called now a gravel pit, an old gravel pit. And they put all the tanks in there, armoured cars and stuff. And we quite happily used to play around in there, and we discovered these big long guns. If you wound a little handle round, it would swivel round. We used to take each other for rides on the barrel of this gun.
Of course, in the wartime, we used to have to queue in the morning for the butchers to open. The hotels were all taken over by the RAF, and they used to keep us amused because they would do their drills up and down while we were standing in the queue. Until their sergeant major realised what we were up to one day and turned them all round to face the other way. But and then of course we've got the big drill hall down the bottom, which was very much used in the wartime, and for lots of people the squadrons got down there and practised and then went off.
And of course there was no street lights because of the war. And in I think it was October 1945, they were gas lights, and the gas lights were all going to come on at because they had a little clock in. They didn't have a lamp lighter with a stick. There was still some of those about, by the way. And when this light was going to come on at about, I suppose it must have been about 6 o'clock, we all gathered round the lamppost outside 138 Loxley Road and had a picnic to celebrate the street. We didn't know what it was all about. We'd never missed anything.
I got called up, as you were, girls were called up when they became 21. But I was already married because I married in the March of 1941. And Mr. King didn't want me to go, of course, because he relied on me. I managed the shop when he was on holiday. But I was quite anxious to go and, let's have a go. And one of the people sitting behind the desk telling you where to go said to me, "What are you prepared to do?" And I said, "I'll do anything, you see." So she said, "Well, we can't send you into the services because you're married. You can only volunteer for that." And I said, "Well, I've already agreed with my husband that I wouldn't join the forces in case he comes on leave." Of course, he promptly went to India for 4.5 years, but that's neither here nor there. So I went to a factory, and you'll be surprised to know I'm actually a qualified acetylene welder. I did, and I'm terrified of gas, so you'll know how that cost me. But I went up to Joseph's, and of course, as my birthday's in August, it was the autumn and the winter, so everything was blacked out. So it was black going to work, black in work, and black coming out. No lights. You couldn't have a light on. Somebody would shout, "How do you put the light out if you've got a light on?" And I sat at this little thing with like a giant hypodermic needle that side and one that side, mixing whatever it was. Still don't know what it is. Then you light it and there's a flame about that long, but you've got goggles on, you only see that little bit. And that's what you attack metal with.
And what was it you were welding?
Fishtails for Lancaster bombers. And the fishtail is the flat bit that comes out at the end of the exhaust pipe. That's as much engineering as I know. I don't know how any of it works. I only know the bit I did. And these bits that were shaped like that were sealed each side, and then they were welded to the exhaust, I presume, not by me, but anyway, I did this and I had to pass a test. And I did pass the test. But by the time I'd done that, the health was giving out because I was shut in and I really wasn't a very fit person anyway. And Barney Joseph, who was very friendly with all the staff there, he said, I'd like you to do arc welding, which is a cleaner sort of weld when you sit in a little cubicle with sparks flying, terrified me. But I didn't get to that because I had to leave, which is why I went on to land and learned how to build roads from clinker from Ball Brothers Foundry and dig potatoes up and not be frightened of rats that ran out of the barn and grow tomatoes. I swore I'd never eat another tomato or a piece of cheese in my life when I finished there because that's all we lived on. But, variety I've had.
Yeah, and amazing that, when the necessity's there to do something, just what you can achieve. And
I mean, imagine being asked to make a road when I didn't know the difference between a spade and a shovel. I soon learned because the clinker falls off a spade, but it's heavy. I can't believe I did the hard work I did, but I loved it. It was great on the land. It was, it gave me a lot of pleasure and a lot of friends I made. All the land girls were all friendly with me, invited me to everything that they did. They were all quite wild because they'd all escaped from offices in Birmingham and parents who told them what to do, and so they were free as birds when they were here.
And where was it you lived at that time?
Well, I was still at home for part of the time, but then I'll admit I just left home and went into digs. And I stayed in the digs until my husband came back in 1945.
And that was in Stratford?
Yes, I was still there then. And I was still working at the nursery then. I liked that job. It was, suited me fine, really. And what girl would ever have a chance to do those sort of things? You learn a lot. You never forget it. Mm. Every job, whatever it is, gives you an opportunity to learn something if you only think about it.
So from the point of view of, obviously, something you say there's really interesting about being a woman and getting the opportunity to do a job like that.
Yes. A shop girl,
How did it go from one state of affairs when those jobs were available to women sort of?
Well, I think the war pushed that on because these girls came out of offices and joined the Land Army. They'd only pushed a pen. And I mean, I'd sold shoes. I was good at selling shoes, and you had to sell them then. You didn't sort of wait for the customer to pick them up. He used to say, get them in and sit them down, get them prisoner, so more or less. You wouldn't have the opportunity to do these things unless the war had come, which forced the men away and made the women do something. I was quite open to doing anything in the first place. I'm glad I did go on the land. I would never have thought of that in 1,000 years, would I?
And then when post-war men returned,
yes,
were the jobs still open then to women?
Well, there was a rule that men had got to be offered their jobs back that they had left. So of course a lot of them did go into them, but some came back with different ideas and didn't go in them. We still had lady conductresses because we'd had lady drivers, but there wasn't an awful lot of movement about because petrol was rationed. So, we'd say, gosh, we got an egg, because you get a tin of dried egg from the Lease Lend with the Americans. They sent tins of dried egg and tins of spam, and they sent something once, and it was called zwan. And my dad said, they've been killing swans. So I don't know, they've got swans in America. But you were accustomed to certain things, and suddenly there'd be, I mean, if you saw a banana, you said, "There's a banana," because we hadn't seen. We had a little evacuee. He was only 5, and we absolutely swallowed him because we were 3 girls and we hadn't got a brother, and he was absolutely swamped with everything. I bought him shoes and knitted him things and made him things and took him everywhere. I took him to Welford and he thought it was the sea because it was the river. He's never seen a river before. But, you know, we gave up, well, I gave up my sugars. I never bothered about sugar, but I gave up my sweets and sugar so he could have the sweets. And that was okay, but I took him out and did things with him that he wouldn't have had the chance to do. If I went to Welford to see my in-laws, I took him with me. So it was something nice for him that he wouldn't have had, coming from, I think, the slummy area of the Small Heath, which was in those days like it had been with us after the First World War, very sort of primitive then. It brings out something in you that you don't know you've got, you know. You don't know you're capable of things. I didn't know. I would never have thought that I would go out of the house on the night I left, that I'd go out in the dark and walk in the dark. And when I mean dark, black, not a hand in front of you. When I shamefully left home, I just walked out. And you see, you don't know what you've got, do you, till you're driven to it.
So in fact, the war, you know, as obviously it was as devastating as it was actually quite an enriching time as well in terms of...
Yes, you know, I mean, it could be a mistake when you say there's nothing good about war. No, there isn't, but sometimes it makes people think. I mean, penicillin and things like that came about that weren't thought of. And it makes you think about the other person. We could stand in the back of our garden in Broad Street when the bombings were on, and we could see Coventry or Birmingham, and you could see the red glow, and it made you think. I mean, this was something nobody would even dream of happening in this country. And you make do, and you don't pick flies or get worried about little things because they don't really matter. You know, they don't really matter.